And that's terribly difficult to do. But what then when you get it? What then? Suddenly the whole thing changes. And it's no longer this awful kind of thing, will I or won't I? Am I good or am I guilty? Am I saint or am I sinner? Then suddenly, at the end of it all, the Christian sees that what he was being invited to, was a party in heaven where they could all sit around and go like this, because that's great, you see, the vibrations. And do it forever. Just like children like to throw stones into a pond and watch the waves go out. Or like birds will sit all through twilight and sing and sing and sing, no hurry, repeating the same themes, sometimes with subtle little variations and so on. They just sit and they sing. So you see, always, when you get down to the bottom of anything, and you say, what's that for? What's that for? You're finally going to get to a point where somebody says, well, I just like to make a noise. I can't explain it, it has no purpose, but I saved my money for years. I bought an insurance policy. I did everything purposefully just so that I could finally sit down and make this noise. Oh, I mean, you may like to smoke cigars, sit in a rocker on the porch, and smell the smell of that smoke. See? You may think that that's very decadent and that you ought to be working for others, that you ought to be giving, raising funds so that there shouldn't be anybody underprivileged. And when you've raised the funds and you've given all that money away to the poor, what are the poor going to do? They've got to find some other poor. They're going to give that, they're going to work for. But then when they work for those, and they're all right, and everybody's all right, what are they going to do? Why, they're going to sit on the porch and they'll smoke a big cigar. Now this has become a serious problem, because it's highly possible that we're entering into an age of automation in which it's not going to be necessary to work. Except, I mean, if you want gravy, it's going to be, yes. But if you want simply to have the basic necessities for survival, the advanced food and medicine and so on that a technological society can produce, you won't have to do a thing. We will move into an age when all that will be, practically speaking, for free, because the machines will earn the money for us, and we'll get paid for it. And people will say, well, now, a human being, well, we've always felt before, you don't have any right to live unless you're productive. You must work, you must produce something. That's why it's always been difficult for a literary man. If you're a farmer, then you know you're serving the community. If you're a fisherman, even if you're a grocer, you know you're doing something useful. But if you're a poet, you begin to get a guilty conscience. Shouldn't I have been a farmer? But so always, though, when you follow it through, when the farmer gets the milk to the baby drinks the milk, blah, 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 absorbs this milk and gets bigger. Finally it comes to be a man. The man does all these things, he gets all this food and he sends it around and he makes more people and he feeds them all, and they say, thank you so much for feeding us, we're doing well. But he may say, well, so what? What's it all about? I mean, it looks as if I've sometimes suggested that all we are is an elaborate system of tubes. And the object of these tubes is to put things in at one end and let them out at the other, and enjoy that. Enjoy it so much that you like other tubes, and you make connections with those tubes in such a way that you get more tubes. Now these tubes have ganglia at each end, at the top end, called a brain. And the point of that ganglion is to be a very sensitive, cunning little thing that finds out where there are things to eat. So they keep reproducing each other, and so the whole of life becomes the flow of a stuff through a tube. Get that through and get it going faster. Get more of it going through. Get more of it. Don't let it foul the things up as it goes through. Everything as it goes through a tube tends to wear the tube out. So the tube tries not to be worn out by the stuff going through it, so as to keep the sensation going on. Now the tubes, when they are through with eating, and they're satisfied in that way, they are going to play other games, just to keep things interesting. And so slowly they invent civilization, and they invent literature and music and painting, and they do all this thing, you see, because when you go off to the evening, you've done your day's work, you've eaten your dinner, I hope not out of too much of a sense of duty. Well, then what? Well, there are so many things you can do. You can go to the concert, where they will make all kinds of complicated noises. And you'll say, my, listen to that. Huh? So that you'll be able to get that feeling of being astounded. What fantastically complicated noises are made here. Or you go dancing. And when you go dancing, you see, you go chitter, 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 all over the room. See? Jiggle, 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 jiggle. Complicated jiggle, see? Even beautiful jiggle, but basically jiggle. And that's what that led up to. So you see, the more you think about it, about what all this work is for, why we are campaigning for this and for that, to get world peace, to get recognition for Negroes, to get this, that, and the other. What do we all want everybody to do? And so when the Negroes get their recognition, then what are they going to do? Well, they're going to gather together, and they're going to go, hoo-ji-doo-ji-doo-ji-boo-ba-hoo-jum-boo, and do all sorts of things like that, because that's great. But you must see, therefore, the whole world as that sort of a thing ultimately. When you finally get down to it, it likes to make noises, it likes to blow bubbles, it likes to dance in a ring, and that's what it's all about. Look at it still another way. Supposing I use words to refer to a certain situation, which happens to be the situation of some trees growing near my front gate. Now, this form of life I can refer to, and I say, here are trees, and you understand what I mean. The word tree is meaningful, and my being able to point out the tree to you, you know I'm making sense. We all agree about the word. But now look at the situation from a slightly higher point of view. Here is a creature that goes to another creature and says, tree. The other creature understands. And we've set up a form of life between us now, which includes the tree and you and I, and we've all referred to it, and we've got the communication method we understand about it. Now see this whole situation that I'm now describing as a form of life, which a form of goings on, which is something in its own turn just like the tree growing. Well, there it is. What does that mean? And you finally see, well, it really doesn't have to mean anything. It's just that we say, good morning. Aren't those beautiful trees at my front gate? Say, yes, they are. Come around here and look at them from the other side. How wonderful they are against the sky. Isn't that great? Well, we've made sense to each other, but I ask again, what does it mean that we make sense to each other? It is a playful activity. It is a going on. It is a performance. Just like the tree is a performance that does this and this and this and this and this with all its branches and leaves, and that absorbs things and so on, and then it drops seeds so that it can go on, and other ones can do this and this and this and this, and they can drop seeds and go on and do so and so and so and so. Now, you have to be very careful at this point, because you may go absolutely stark staring crazy. At this point, some people get the horrors, and they suddenly see the whole performance of this human race as nothing but automatic gyrations. They see here are these mechanisms all sitting around here, and they're saying, we're human. Good morning, good afternoon, we're here, isn't this nice, etc. And you can suddenly get the horrid feeling that they all are just so much wiggly, protoplasmic hullabaloo that goes through the motions of being alive. In other words, if you insult one of them or you hurt one of them, they get on a pained expression. But you can get to the crazy point of regarding that as nothing more than the fact when you hit water with a stone, it goes splash. Naturally, a person gets on a pained expression when they're hurt. But that's all it is. Then there are certain tensions inside that being. They may be very acute tensions, they may be rather slight, but it's just tensions going on inside. There's nothing to worry about. And so you can suddenly get the awful feeling that you are surrounded by nothing but senseless process. And so when people sometimes do get that feeling, they lose all their compassion, they lose all their morals, they go entirely to pieces, and they feel they can exploit everybody in any situation in all directions. And so there's a sort of a hairline difference between that and a vision which is very much the same. Very much the same. But instead of being a kind of a thing you put down by saying, oh, well, it's just a lot of behavior. That's all it is. You say, good heavens, think of that. You know, it's not so bad after all. For example, there are many, many situations of physical or moral pain of which we are very frightened. And it's largely, we're frightened of them because we have been taught that these are bad for us. You see, there are some children who are thought of as schizophrenic, sometimes the Mongolian idiot. Doesn't really have, he's in a situation where he cannot absorb adult judgments about happenings. So he really doesn't care if he gets run over in the street. He's not interested in adult life goals. And so a Mongolian idiot type of child, you can get on with them wonderfully, provided you never cross them. If they do something you don't want them to do, change the subject, interest them in something else, but never say no, because they roll with anything. You know, if he suddenly wants to strike the matches and light the house on fire, you go up to him and say, whoops, and he gets so interested, he looks at that and says, wow, and you're off. And if you want to pay attention, you can play with a child like that for ages, because they'll do anything. They'll sit down at table and they'll get interested in bread and jam, and they'll pick it up like that and drop it on the plate and splosh the jam all over the place. They'll make figures in it. They're always absolutely fascinated, but they're way out. They won't do what we want them to do. Well, we say you're idiots, because they have a head shape different from ours, and they've got another idea about life. But it doesn't really follow that they're idiots. I mean, in a bad sense. They're living on different lines. They've got a different game. But so we have a little bit thing to learn from them. That they don't go in for all this business about giving life meaning and arranging it in certain patterns about which you get compulsive. They just go with it as it comes. So their point of view is apparently then quite different from the person to whom the thing is a rattling monstrosity of meaninglessness. This, of course, is liable to be the person who reacts that way against an overdose of insistence that life be meaningful and that a child behave sensibly and orderly and in accordance with some domineering adult's game. When he sees that all that doesn't necessarily hold together, he's apt to get a bad reaction. But now to get back to this thing, when the adult who has got his program and is pushing the child through it, supposing a child vomits, overate something or other, the milk was bad, the adult teaches the child that the sensation of vomiting is disgusting, because the adult goes bleh, see, and makes the child feel that in addition to vomiting, he ought to feel disgusted by it. That makes a complication. All right? So when the adult hurts the child, pinches it, has a doctor stick a hypodermic into it, or something has to be done, then there's a sensation of pain. But when mother sees the child stuck with the needle and she goes, you know, or something, this doesn't help the child at all. The child feels that in addition to screeching, reacting, or jumping to the pain, it also has to go about it, you see? Because mother did. Or if the child feels like crying, crying is a shameful thing to do. You mustn't cry. So the child, in addition to having the cry thing, has to have the shame about the cry thing. And you see that sets up reactions to reactions to reactions on different levels inside us, whereby all these complicated problems begin. Think, for example, about the way we humans die. It's just terrible. We sweep ourselves under the carpet. We don't let death be an important thing, really. Because look at what we do to die. Death is terribly important. Just as important as being born, or getting married. But death is something that we can't allow, because it is a flat contradiction of our image of ourselves. So instead of dying in a riotous and glorious way, we get shuffled off to hospitals where everything is kind of, well, good intentioned indeed, but it's kind of, the doctors don't know what to do when people die, because doctors are supposed to cure you. They can't help you die, therefore. They're out of role when that happens. And so their whole attitude to your death is, oh, I'm so sorry, this is dreadfully unfortunate. It's too bad. Well, it isn't necessarily too bad. Maybe a very good thing. They used to say with mothers in childbirth, that this is a dreadful pain that you've got to go through because it's your punishment for eating that fruit of the tree in the beginning of time. You are a daughter of Eve, and therefore you suffer. It's very good for you. And so everybody got these big ideas about the pains of labor, until some doctors came along and said, let's invent some new language and re-hypnotize these patients in another way and call it contractions instead of pains. And this made things simpler for many women. Not all women. A lot of them simply not going to be convinced at all that they oughtn't to hurt like blazes. So, but when those who are convinced suddenly realize that this so-called pain is a sort of orgasm you can have, the attitude is a lot better. Well, let's get another revolution. Instead of talking about the pangs and the pains of death, let's give them a new name. The ecstasy of disappearing. I'm serious. You may laugh, but the thing is that all those sensations have been in a social context where they're interpreted negatively, and so everybody, when you're having them, they say, "Oh dear me, oh dear, that's awful. We're so sorry for you, and we're going to give you a pill to take away the pain." And that's all right, but it's not so much the pill, it's the attitude of saying, oh dear, isn't it awful, you're going to die. Well, is it? I mean, it's very difficult because we've all been so thoroughly indoctrinated about this. And we feel, I remember all through my childhood the way that my peer group and all the literature we read played up death. The image of the skull, the ghosts, the shrieking horrors in the dark, the graveyard, the tolling bell, the bats, the shroud, and all this hocus pocus, making this, a grisly scene, so that everybody interprets the basic sensations that are involved in this in a highly charged, overloaded fashion. So then, when the cat dies, it dies with great dignity. A sick cat disappears, especially if it's out in country, and it curls up in the grass and dies. The birds, they drop off the trees. I remember Ibram Lassor describing a dying gull on the beach near Montauk. This bird looked and looked and looked into the sun. And as the sun went down, the bird looked and looked and followed the heat light of that sun until there was nothing left. It shivered and died. Very dignified. But human beings aren't allowed to die like that. Because when you die, you see, it's a big mess. It's you with all your memories that are being folded up. I remember a woman who came to me had high blood pressure, and she said, I'm sick to death, afraid of dying. She said, I don't know what it is. I can't make out why I'm so frightened of dying. But I don't think it's the pain I'm afraid of. I don't think I have any fear of what's going to happen to me after death in some sort of heaven or hell, but what is it? So we talked about this for a long time, from all sorts of points of view, and finally she said, you know, I believe what I'm afraid of is what other people are going to say. I just can't stand the thought of my funeral, with all my friends around there saying, well, poor old Gert, it caught up with her at last. Well, now, she had touched the point exactly, because it wasn't quite what people were going to say about her, but it's what people have taught you to think about death, about the disappearance of yourself, your ego, your memory system. Because with all the propaganda that's gone on to you, you must build this thing up, you know. You must be you must be great, you see. And then when it comes to an end, they say, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, you couldn't make it after all, as if you ever could. So then, we need to see death and its allied phenomena in its suchness. That is to say, well, it is just after a certain time, as the leaves in the fall disintegrate and fall off the tree, and we say, well, what a lovely autumn it was, this New England trees, a very gorgeous season. So in the same way, human beings fall apart. And well, we say that's terrible. And the unanimity of the social attitude makes it terrible for each individual. But supposing the unanimity of the social attitude was quite different, and there is no reason why it shouldn't be, and falling apart is considered quite the thing to do. After all, it helps to clean things up, it gets old stuff out of the way, and so we, us, I, can all go on. We renew, we come back. And so the whole thing, you see, is this. You can't suddenly switch from death as an awful horror to death as a great event. You have to go through a certain intermediate point where you have to see it just as that. This is very useful in getting yourself accustomed to all kinds of queer things. There was a woman who was a good friend of mine who moved into the country and found her house was full of black widow spiders. Well, she was horrified. But being very sensible, she bought a book about black widows, and she got a model, there's the things that they sell in from biological firms, a dried black widow spider encased in a plastic cube. And she got a magnifying glass, and she studied this thing. And she learned everything about black widow spiders. Finally, she captured a live one and looked at it under a magnifying glass, and slowly, 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 she appreciated the suchness of it. I mean, it's a thing that goes this way and that way, and it has things that go like this, and it bites, and it does this and that. And that's that. Well, having appreciated the suchness of it, she relieved herself of her fear. And then she learned after a while to respect them, and then really to be on very good terms with them. She knew how to keep out of their way and what their habits were. Always when she picked up a shoe, shake the shoe, don't put your foot in without shaking the shoe first. Little things like that. So, somebody wrote me the other day from Santa Barbara and said that in her part of the country there are more private planes than anywhere else in the United States, and they fly at less than 1,000 feet, and they keep going over her place. And she's a very well brought up lady. She says, I'm horrified to find myself running out of doors, shaking my fist at these planes and using foul language. She said, I just can't stand them at any price. So I wrote back, I told her the story about the spiders, and said, now what you're to do is you get yourself a certain book, which I named, which is a complete photographic catalogue of all makes of private planes in the world. And you are to identify them, and every time a plane goes over, look it up in a book and see what kind it is. Go down to the airport, watch them come in and go out, get rides, and never miss one. Always get right into that plane situation. Because then this constant over the house, which is you can get rid of it, you see, and you can say isn't that fun? People hate drumming. Every time people start playing the conga drums, they call the police. Because there's something about that which seems threatening. They think, why, the cannibals are in the dark, they're out after us. And still you get with it yourself, you see, and you move with that, then however noisy it isn't a problem any longer. But you have to see the suchness of it first, that it is just doing this kind of a bum-ba-chitcha-bum-bum-bum-ba-chitcha-bum-bum, and that's that. That's what it is. And it isn't a threat, nor is it, for that matter, a promise. In our fourth session this morning, I was trying to put across two principal ideas. One of which is that since the idea of thusness is not a way of putting down the nature of things, that is to say, it's not a form of nothing buttery. There are certain things to be considered about it. One is that there is what we call consciousness involved in the nature of thusness. Thusness is transparent and reverberating. And the other was that within this domain there is room for an enormous number of value games. But you must remember that value games are games. Now let me just review those 2 points slightly because they're tremendously important. First of all, we've got into the habit of thinking of the world as a physical continuum which is not really a continuum, which is divided into the inert things and the earth things, into the conscious and the unconscious, the living and the dead, the organic and the inorganic. And the mythology of the 19th century was to make it a case that everything was really inorganic, see? And that consciousness is something actually purely mineral and metallic, only it's so complicated and so it's got all kinds of liquid and gooey things in it, but they're basically minerals and they're basically machinery, and it's all like that, you see. And I say the objection to that point of view is simply that it's a way of looking down your nose at things. In fact, it's an objection. The objection to it is that it's an objection. We won't go into such embarrassing questions as who objects, but the thing is that it's when you construe the whole universe in an objectionable way, the person who does this is really saying, I want to be miserable. Now, you're perfectly entitled to be miserable. Or I want to be realistic and miserable in that sense. And that's perfectly okay if that's the way you want to be. But he has absolutely no right whatsoever to say that his point of view is more valid than ours when we say the opposite. That actually the universe is a continuum of whatever it is, thusness, and that there's a spectrum in which there are the very conscious things and the only slightly conscious things. But all of it is conscious. And so that when you ring a bell and ears get this as ting, The bell itself gets it as a state of vibration, which is a very simple form of consciousness, but there it is. So you don't have to explain, you don't have to invent a ghastly problem, which is, how did anything conscious ever get into this mechanism? It's a simpler thing that it always was there. Everything is conscious, but conscious in very many differing degrees. I don't really know whether that's a simpler explanation than another. I mean, somebody could, I suppose, scratch their heads a while and say, how do you get from one degree to another? See, they want to know how you get from the unconscious rock to the conscious living being. And I say that's no problem. They're just different degrees of the same thing. Well, he says, how do you get from one degree to another? And has he recreated all over again the same problem we started with? Maybe he has. But if he has, you can see a new line on the thing, that this man's function is to create problems, is to make interesting difficulties. He's like a person who makes up the puzzle, the crossword puzzle every day for the newspaper. There's a man just setting difficulties for you. And you love to get over them, or else it doesn't interest you because you are playing the game, my game's more interesting than yours. But nevertheless, for some reason or other, the idea of a spectrum, of a somewhat more or somewhat less of the same thing, seems to make a great deal of sense. It seems more plausible than the idea of having to have two completely different substances, a stuff called matter and a stuff called spirit or mind or something like that, and try and see how they work upon one another. If you see, in other words, let's take the beautiful image of the fern. First of all, a stalk, just a thing like that. And then more of them, but coming out of the sides. And then out of the sides of those, more stalks, out of the sides of those, you see? And then out of the sides of all those little ones come little ones still, see? And you say, well, look at that, it's getting very spiky, isn't it? Full of spines. And then gradually, right on the edge of the spines, the more go until they're all going like this way, more and more and more and more, until it becomes soft and hairy, see? And suddenly you've got what you'd call a vegetable. If you look at the watch, some people have extremely tick-tock watches. That is to say, they just have the hours marked with spots. There are even more simple watches than that. I've seen watches that simply have 4 spots on them, 12 and 6, 9 and 3. But on the other extreme, you can buy very expensive watches that have stopwatches on them, and things that tell you the date, and tachometers, and all kinds of involved things, and this watch's calibrations will be getting more and more and more complicated all the way around. It begins to look like a flower. You see, it begins to look, what started out looking like a kind of a metallic object ends up looking like a vegetable, or some kind of wonderful growing alive thing. Beyond some mysterious point of complexity, it seems to become alive. So this is what I mean by the spectrum. The various, just let's say, games that are going on. The very, very firm at one end, and at the other end, all kinds of complicated mechanical, metric motions, rhythmic motions, that are so difficult to reduce to anything so simple as germ, germ, we say they're alive. Whereas the things at the other end that are very, very simple like that, you see, we say they are relatively inert. But whether you say that the inert is merely less alive, or whether you say that the alive is merely the maximum complexity of the inert, all depends on whether you want to say yes to the world or whether you want to say no. So it is, as it were, a yes saying that makes everything seem alive, a no saying that makes everything seem dead. And when you say no and you make it all seem dead, what happens? You experience a very extreme form of differentiation between yourself on the one hand and everything that you experience on the other. Because if you want to put this world down and say it's all just a bunch of junk, you can't do that without isolating yourself from it. You've got to stand aside and be a completely independent observer, because if you say, therefore I too am just a lot of junk, and therefore this statement that I'm making is just a lot of junk, then obviously you can't expect anybody to lay very much credence upon it. But on the other hand, when you say, well, good gracious, this whole thing is something, isn't it? Then you put yourself into it. You don't stand aside from it any longer. You admit that you too are part of the whole thing, that your ego, yourself, is so inextricably involved with everything that you experience that there really ultimately isn't any difference between the kind of thing that's going on and you. Then you see, you've got a total system. You're one with it, you're not standing aside from it. But to make that clear, I just have to go into something that is puzzling for us whose thinking is based on sentence structure and of a kind of grammar that has subject, verb and predicate, and a kind of mythology wherein we think of consciousness and being aware by analogy with photography and with mirrors reflecting images. If you can understand that what you are is everything that you know, there are, you see, there are infinitely many ways of, language ties us up. I was going to say being conscious of what's going on. Each one of us looks at the present scene from a different point of view, but let me say, look at it like this. Supposing I say instead, each one of us is a different point of view with respect to the situation. You see, we can say, here's the situation, and each one of us, there's an eye, you see, looks at it from a different point of view. And so we go into it like this. Now that's a very disintegrated picture. What is the connection between this and this? What's behind this? And where does all that come from? What's its relation to this, the situation? No, we are part of the situation. You can't deny that. So you see that the thing behind this is this, you see. See what I mean? You're not out of it. All right, then if that's the way it is, we've got to draw a different diagram altogether. Here's the situation again. Now, we talk about a point of view towards the situation, but can't you see that the situation grows out of itself, points of view, like this? See? And then here they are. The little eyes in the end of it. You see, like a snail, but it is a big snail. It's with many, many eyes. See? So it looks at itself like that. Looks at itself through many eyes. But so, in other words, what each one calls ourself is a point of view taken by what each one of us calls our experience. You get that? Isn't the experience, in other words, doesn't need really an experience and an experiencer. You don't need a thought, and then to have a thought you have to have a thinker, or to have a thinker then you can have a thought. All I'm introducing you to, you see, is really a simplified language. Do you feel a feeling? Or is feeling a feeling the same thing as feeling? It's easier, isn't it, to say feeling instead of feeling a feeling? There was a faith healer of Deal who said, though pain is not real, when the point of a pin goes into my skin, I dislike what I fancy I feel. Or that other limerick that some of you know that I made up. There was a young man who said, though it seems that I know, what I would like to see is the eye that knows me when I know that I know that I know. This is what it is. So when you see that things, the physical world and consciousness are inseparable. It isn't that the physical world is reflected in a mirror, but that it and consciousness are all one. But that consciousness seems to be something that is different from the world and looks at it, because it is done, focused, projected in so many different ways. These are like the spikes coming out. See, you remember my fern thing, right? We can play ferns with this. And we can start growing little ones out of here, you see. Or take any one of these and start doing this. Take one of these and start doing this. All points of view. Growing out of the center. So then, remember that what you are experiencing, you can remember it, perhaps it's easier for some of you in this way. What you are seeing out there in front of you is actually a sensation inside your head. All that you see is a conversion of quanta in the external world into the form of your brain. Your brain in its turn being something in the external world. Now then, when it's in your brain, you say, and now I see it in terms of my brain. Well, is there somebody standing back inside your brain, you see, and looking at your brain and saying, well, there it is, what a nice picture. See, if you can get this, it's wonderful. The centers of the optic nerves are right in the back of your head. They're not just here. If they were just here, you could imagine someone standing inside your head and looking at you. But actually, they're right back there. So what you are seeing in front of your eyes is right back in here, where it's actually happening. So you can stroke the view here with your fingers, see? Now, there isn't somebody in the middle who's turned round, looking at the back of your head, like the people in Plato's cave, to see what's out in front. The point is that the sensation of yourself and the sensation of other people is the same thing. And that's mutual between all of us, see? We all are our view of other people and other things. Views of views. Views of viewings. And so, you don't have to introduce the problem. Of how the knower knows. How does the world make an impact on the knowing subject so that it can be aware of, be conscious of everything else? There isn't that kind of mirror or camera process going on. That's the important thing to understand, because everybody's thought is so powerfully influenced by the metaphors that he uses. And the metaphors for knowing and for consciousness, mirrors, cameras, etc., can be extraordinarily introducing unnecessary complications. Simply see that what you are aware of in terms of external sensory experiences, in terms of so-called internal feelings, internal thoughts, that is what you are. Krishnamurti puts it so beautifully when he tries to show that behind the stream of thoughts there isn't a thinker. He says you create the thinker, you create the thought of a thinker behind the thoughts in a moment of insecurity. When you want to withdraw, but actually there is simply the stream of what you could call luminous experience. And you can translate, you can take away the word luminous and put the word conscious in its place. So see it again. Your heads, your nervous systems, your eyes, your senses, your bodies, not as something that encounters the external environment from outside. You all are the external environment. Rather, your heads and eyes and so on are points, you see, put out by the environment as a whole, as a totality, through which it feels all around like many sensitive hairs, like a sea urchin with all those little spines coming out of it, and each one of us is one. Well, now, There is a final matter to be considered. I have given some seminars on Far Eastern aesthetics, and some of you may have attended some of them. When we talk about Chinese art, as compared, say, with Mexican art, Cambodian, we say it's naturalistic. On the other hand, these other art forms are highly stylized. What do we mean when we say an art form is more natural than another one? It's rather difficult to say, isn't it? Because you're trying to say that somehow or other things that look like this are not as natural as things that look like this. What do you mean? What is natural somehow strikes us as being a little bit more asymmetrical, a little bit more wiggly than what we call artificial. Well, ever looked at sugar crystals under a microscope? Beautiful cubes. What about iron pyrites? All kinds of things in the crystal world. They look very formal, very stylized, very artificial. Go to the Charles Darwin Hall at the Museum of Natural History here and take a look at the glass models of radiolaria. You have never seen anything so artificial. But my goodness, what a wow of artificiality. It's like looking at a master jeweler, Cellini beyond Cellini, has made baubles to hang around your neck, tiaras to put here, all kinds of gorgeous things. But this is the magic of nature. Really, go there. It's open now, they were renewing it, but it is the most beautiful exhibition in New York. Makes all the painting look pretty silly. Living forms that are nevertheless absolute craftwork, master craftwork of jewelry. So you see, the point is, fundamentally there is no such thing as an artificial work. All that happens is nature. All that happens is, however apparently, still within the one domain. But once again, you see, we get a continuum. Everything in this continuum is nature, just like everything in the continuum is consciousness. But at one end, it's apparently less natural than at the other. It all is natural. But what is less natural isn't necessarily for that reason boring, lacking in form, lacking in form. Because beyond the radiolaria style is the works of art of mankind. Beyond them, the work of the computer. All in the direction, the dimension of the artificial. But you never reach the purely artificial. You never get outside the domain of nature. So, from one point of view then, everything that exists in the whole world is in the course of nature. It is the Tao, it is the flow of being. And you can manifest the Tao and be in accord with it and be harmonious with the whole universe by doing any single thing you like. If you're a painter, you can go back home and you can take a bottle of ink and throw it at the wall and smash. And there it is. You can't stop it. If you're a writer, you can take somebody else's essay, cut it up the center, cut it across, and paste it in different ways, and then read it straight over. They're doing this now. And that's all right too. See, that's it. You can roll down the street. You can totter about and dress upside down. Put your pants on your top and your coat on the bottom. Anything goes, you see, in that domain. It's all right. Don't worry. See. But nobody will understand you. You won't make a communication if you do that. You see, that's what some of our artists are doing today. They've discovered that they're completely or can be completely liberated. So they just do anything at all and have the nerve to sell it. But now look here, supposing that we're going to make a communication. I want to find a way in which I can make some things look more natural than others. How am I going to do that? I'm going to want to show you by some stratagem, whether it's by talk or by art, how you can have more suchness somewhere than elsewhere. That doesn't seem possible, does it? There is a saying in Zen write in a funny way. You can say this character, means mountain. And this character means gets, attains to, grasps. The mountain gets the mountain. And the water gets the water. See? Now, mountain, water, the two characters together mean landscape. So this refers to the earth as a whole. Now, when does a mountain get the mountain and the water gets the water? The answer is that the mountain gets the mountain when a particular mountain looks just like a mountain, and when the water looks just like water. And we can say of a person, this man is so much of a man, this woman is so much of a woman. So the man gets the man, the woman gets the woman. And well, you can do that too, you see. The man gets the man, and the woman gets the woman. So, how are we going to do that, though? Every man is a man, every woman is a woman, every mountain, after all, is a mountain. But some mountains are more like mountains than others. G.K. Chesterton once put it in a kind of satirical way, all religions are really the same religion, especially Buddhism. And he was trying to poke fun at people who say all religions are really the same. But what a wise word, you see, he had there. So now it comes to this question of how do we show something as being more of the nature of thusness or especially of the nature of thusness. It's the same question as how do we show something as being more natural than something else. Now this lies, you see, this is the basic problem of aesthetics in the Far East. How a house can be constructed to look more like a work of nature than other houses. Because this is part of the real fun of going to a place like Kyoto, where for centuries, they've been tremendously aware of this problem. Now you can go on the one hand to the Heian Shrine. The Heian Shrine is a huge Shinto shrine on the east side of Kyoto, which is built in Chinese Baroque style. And it is all orange, red paint and gold, with blue tiled roofs, with every kind of a curlicue and luxury and sort of, it's a real dolled up scene, with a magnificent garden. And in this garden, you know, there are lakes with carp in, and wonderful piers going out to summer houses on the end of the piers, with, again, magnificently curled roofs and everything as ornate as possible. And you walk into that place and you think, good Lord, I got into a willow pattern plate. Or this is a famille vert or something, you know. I mean, it's like you remember China from your grandmother's china cabinet. It's just that. And you think, well, you know, how unnatural can you get? How contorted, how twisted, how artificial. And then you go across to a place called Shisendo, up in the hills. And here is a little rustic house built by some great samurai who wanted to retire from all that political war scene, and built himself a place that would look as much as possible as if it hadn't actually happened on purpose. But now, how could he do that? He could have found a place which hadn't happened on purpose at all. He could have taken simply the hillside and sat down there and not done a thing, but somehow adapt himself to the changing temperature and become nature. But it's not the nature of a man to do that. He needs clothes because he didn't grow fur, and he needs a house, and he needs to eat, and so on. And so a man does it in a different way. But he did make a place to look as much as possible as if no one had really interfered with things. All of it is, from a certain point of view, artificial. Every bush, every rock has been carefully considered. Its position minutely planned. Because the man enjoyed the problem of how natural can I make it. He really knocked himself out. Now you see, look here, here's the problem of how natural can I make it. I want to arrange in this area some rocks. See, this is a big expanse of sand. And I want to put them so that they don't look as if they had arrived there artificially. And what am I going to do? Obviously, if I do this, I've got a rock here, and a rock here, and a rock there. Well, somebody will say, 1, 2, 3, huh? You know, it looks as if somebody laid them there. And what you wanted was a situation where it It didn't look as if it had been laid out like that. So we begin again. So we put rock 1, rock 2, and rock 3. Now, are we going to accuse anybody of anything? Yes, maybe we are. We're going to say, now, wait a minute, you couldn't get away from it so far. You put these two together in alignment, close, and then you thought, well, then the other one should be further away from it. It should be somewhere like that, see? But then you would say, no, they're all pointing the same direction. Reverse this one and put it that way. See, it still looks a little artificial. It always looks artificial, so long as we can trace the thinking of the artist. But when we can't trace the thinking of the artist, look, we'll divide the thing in two. We're still using the same pieces. Well, they might have been thrown there, but that's not good enough. What we want is the point where we can trace his thinking to the point where it has only just vanished. We are just going to keep pace with it and say this is not quite as if it had been thrown down there. Something a little better than if it had been thrown down there. And that is the most difficult thing in the world for an artist to achieve. I mean, there's a trick to that. In other words, they've slowly rotated, but at distances which don't suggest orderly, numbered arrangement. Some of you may immediately see that trick that I used. Some of you may not see it. But the point is that the artist gets to the situation with relation to his beholders where he has a trick just beyond what they see and almost just beyond what he knows. Do you see? It just reaches a critical point. And so it is so close to chaos, and yet so close to being order, that it's the point where the one turns into the other. Because here again you've got a continuum. You've got chaos way out here, you've got order way over here. And you can approach this one, or approach this one, but at a certain moment, when you approach chaos, but it's still really order, then you get a garden like Rio Anji. And you go there and see the most fabulous arrangement of things so as to look natural, done with infinite care and patience. So what happens here? In a garden like Rio Anji, which is just rocks on sand, there are more, there are 5 rocks, not 3. What you have is somebody revealing that everything is natural basically, by doing something more natural than anything else. So you can imagine in terms of human character what this experiment would involve. We want a person who indicates to everybody else that really and truly everything goes, anything goes. But so that this person shall not be confused with being a complete mess. See? He has to have a very, very carefully natural character. Yet at the same time, the mystery of this character and how it works must escape everybody who knows him, and it must even escape himself. Because he must be able to do it without really trying. So do you see from this that there are many, many things involved in a truly naturalistic art form, or in something which reveals the nature of suchness more than something else, when indeed everything reveals it. Everything is natural, everything is divine, but then there might be someone or something that approximates so well to the divine that you actually see it. The secret in all this is, first of all, that there isn't a method. Or to put it in another way, that you have to come to the point of losing everything, of letting go completely. As an Arab in a sandstorm, when the storm is absolutely impossible and overwhelming, he kneels down on the sand, he puts his burnous completely over his head, and he curls up like a fetus and waits. And because sand can often, light sand blown by the wind can be quite porous, even if he gets covered, he can breathe. But he doesn't try, he doesn't use any energy to fight the storm. So in a raging sea, you have to turn off the engines. Otherwise, every time the propellers are thrown out of the water, it'll shake the ship to bits and drift. The person who wants to master this must first get the feeling of being able to drift, of seeing that suchness, in other words, that nature is in all directions, and that you have really no alternative. Nothing you can do can hold it up, stop death, change, anything else. You have to, for a time, to go with it completely. Let go everything. And then as you do that, you see, just in the same way as the sailor finds that the wind blows him, if there is wind blowing and he's got any kind of a thing to be blown, he'll be blown by the wind. And after experimenting how it is for a while just to be blown along by the wind, he discovers, good heavens, you can do little things that will change the course. So in exactly the same way, when you let yourselves go completely, let's say you imagine that you are completely determined, there's nothing you can do, you're just puppets on strings, and you accept the situation, you will then suddenly discover that you've got new life, and that you can start controlling it, and you can start playing with it in the masterly way that these men made gardens and did magnificent calligraphy.